Hey guys, today we're going to be animating a mechanical arm. We're going to be going over grouping, parenting, and setting limits for your transitions and rotations. Specifically for this project, we're going to be animating the joints of the arm to create a realistic flow instead of animating the entire object by itself. Alright, we're going to begin by setting up our groups. So a lot of this has to do with setting up the groups for the different layers of the object and then parenting them. Now if you do this correctly, you shouldn't have to manually parent at all, because what we're going to be doing is setting up groups within groups, which means that Maya will automatically parent them as we go along. So first we're going to grab all of our parts of our object and do Control G to group. This will create a master group that will control the entire object and be a base point for our parenting. Then we're going to grab all the parts except for the base and do Control G again. Now you can see how it parented this second group inside the maximum group. So what we're going to do again is we're going to grab all our parts and start deselecting objects that we don't need. Keep in mind when you're grouping, you're going to want to group from the base to the tip. That way our parents and groups are done correctly. Now if you mess up a little bit like I did right here, you can manually parent if you want with P, or just middle mouse drag the object into the outliner. Or if you want, you can just Control Z and redo the entire group if you want, like I did. When we group within groups, it automatically parents them, so we don't have to worry about manually grouping them later on or at the beginning. When we're done with our groups, we're going to be going ahead and moving on to setting the pivots for the groups. So just go ahead and go to every single one of your groups on your list and just move the pivot to the center point of the different joints. Now obviously for the gears, it's going to be for the center of the gears so that they can rotate on them. But the joints you're going to want to put at the center of the axles. As you can see, I use the 4-panel to get the front and the side views, just so I can make sure that it's actually in the center of the object. Alright, we're going ahead and moving on to creating the limits for the pivots. You're going to want to go to your attribute editor and go to limit information on the right. Go to rotate, which is what we'll be working in, and when you're doing this, the checkboxes on the left and right enable the limits for the min and max, and the arrows allow you to copy the current value in the limits to the left or right, just so it's easier so you have to type it in. You could type it in if you want to, if you prefer that, but using the limits in the middle and then just using the arrow keys to move them over is usually my preferable option. Alright, so when we're setting up the limits for the joints, you're going to want to avoid clipping as much as possible. So you're going to want to rotate your object as far as possible without clipping into the other, and then go ahead and move the limit to the left on the negative, or if you start with the positive side, move it to the positive, and then what I like to do is just copy it over to the other side and make it negative or positive according to which side you're on. Because the mob is set up in a symmetrical way, you can do that, but you'll see later on when we get to the fingers that you can't just copy the limits over. Limiting the fingers is a little bit more complicated than the joints. You can't just copy over the limits like I was doing before. You're going to want to manually go in for the min and max and just look for clipping in the axle housing and the gear. You don't have to worry too much about, obviously, the fingers clipping into each other, because when you're animating, the fingers are going to be moving away from each other when you're picking up the ball and such. So usually I just worry about the fingers clipping when you're animating it. And when I'm doing this, just worry about it clipping into the axle housing itself. As you can see here, I'm just looking at where the finger just dips a little bit too much into the axle housing, and that's where I'll set my max. Alright, so this next part I want to talk to you guys about is creating the balls themselves. Obviously you're going to want to resize the ball so it looks like it would actually fit. I like to do it to 0.8, but 1 is fine if you want to keep it that way. Now the trick is, for this, you could have 1 ball, but I like to create 2 balls, one that will translate on the ground and in the air, and then one that will be squashing in the hand. Now the reason I do this is because it gets a little complicated when you go to pick up the ball, and you're going to have to be translating it with the arm itself, and that's just too many keyframes for me to keep up with. So I like to create 2 balls. The second ball will be grouped within the wrist itself. That way it can move with the arm, and I won't have to worry about translating the ball while moving the arm. It also gives a great way to be able to squash and stretch the ball with a pivot in the middle without having to switch the pivots up. As you can see here, I grouped it within the wrist, and I can easily turn the wrist and the ball stays where it is. When we're animating, we're going to be switching between the visibility of the balls. The first ball will be visible when it's like moving and translating, and the second ball will be invisible until we pick it up. So right here I have an example of me picking up the ball and making the first ball visible until the arm actually picks it up. At that point I make the second ball with the visibility on and turn the visibility off for the first ball, and make sure to key those in. And then while you're squashing the second ball in your hand with the first ball that's invisible, now you can move it to wherever you need it to be when the arm lets go of the ball, so that when the arm like throws the ball or drops it, it just appears there and does the animation. So I'm going to leave you guys to animate. Before that, I'm going to give you some quick tips. Before you animate, set up an outline. I did mine in sticky notes, and I have a timetable with just what I want the objects to do within it. Now, when you animate, go ahead and, when you're beginning, to just set up the 1 for every single joint. Obviously, you would do that when you're animating a regular object, but it's important that you do it for every joint, because it's not going to set a 1 for every object just because you did a 1 for the parent. obviously what we learned on Wednesday is to set up your extreme keyframes first, which is how the outline's great, and then going back and doing the in-betweens when you're just setting up the smoothness of the animation itself. Alright guys, so good luck on animating your mechanical arm. Your requirements are to make a lively scene with the ball squashing at least once inside the arm and having the ball bounce at least once. So I look forward to just looking at what you guys can create, and I'm willing to help you as well as I'm willing to help you on any questions that you have. So good luck.